Hello to everyone.
Yeah. And tadiring the anijidel and the cocum no the nijidela to chija the number soma and the Jensu Chong Hajang Gabotans and in such in some years.
So first of all, I want to thank Shide Group that they gave me this opportunity to give this kind of talk, and also I want to say that I'm really glad to meet you all today, and yeah, I just want to greet you with hello and Trashidele.
아니 니밀라 손음 톱된세 같은 단다 법초 리본곰발 로용 지신 같은 이진스라 근데 단단데 지 내려 담신로 제 모모님 제 도만러지 아니 가서는 지 시야는 논천로 정해나 아니 공거 여선만 그래라 근데 지 가서 지금 막고 같은데는 아니 좋아나로 치스 고마 차이로요나 자 세번 맞아요.
Yes, so at first I want to introduce myself. My name is Sonam Tobden. I came from the south of India, from the Japan monastery. There I'm studying. And actually it's the first time that I'm giving a lecture in front of a few people about this kind of topic. So yeah, of course, that there might be mistakes and there might be things that will be not very clear. So in that case, I want you to just ask a question directly.
Yes, nida joje디 toni da niji nyamlenga so mase dekid tabusasa ane tindiji shejayo sarata tindijila chaji tindiji deyos yanchi number sumal chik ane 펜토아지 가지 좀에 ane 야보즈 지저 팀아서 지지나 ane 타본드 차송에 기 아닌가 여스다 하고 야보즈 하고 뭐선스.
So in general, the topic that I plan to discuss about is the way of creating a happy life by means of practicing compassion and the wisdom of emptiness. So this was my plan actually. But whether it's going to be beneficial, this kind of talk, I don't really know to say. And also, I have this kind of doubt that maybe the way that I give this lecture, like whether it will be too difficult to understand or not. So I don't know.
That's what I need to share. I don't say she ngans yourself. Don't say ngadi. I don't buy any sena conditions. I that Tonyala that to something Tonyala Kebajina Guba Carrieresra. And Tony said Toby Talam Carrieresra. And Tony Gatola and some Tambayana, Tiga Niji, Jamselaya, Niba Trangar Drensa Candiresra. And Tiga Macedon Messic Deki on temperature Candiores. What in it that then saying Andrish can share in Sra. Telatini Matsidiki Jira, that Tony Tanji Yamlinga. So China Matsidiki on temperature Carriores. So,
okay, so this topic I'm going to discuss about through 5 points. So the first point is what is the meaning of emptiness. Then the second point is the need of analyzing or examining the topic of emptiness. The third point is what are the methods for realizing emptiness. Then the fourth point is how by realizing emptiness, compassion and love are naturally evolve and develop within us. And then the fifth point is what are the methods, what is the way that the happiness is being produced in our life as a result of this practice?
That's that Tony said any Kandijire Sevayana Tombo and Tony said Kaya Meba, Chegam Meba Tindijimares, Tomba said so the and Tony Gatandata and Tinjin Jong, Tim Jong, Tonda Tindiji and Risha Javores, and Maze and Tony said 이게 내리 고마시 가서라 이게 내 땅 고마시 내린 타투 바지라 안에 돈이 세고레스.
So then the first point, what is emptiness? So emptiness, does it mean nothing? Does it mean absolutely nothing? So actually this is not the meaning of emptiness. The meaning of emptiness is actually a dependent arising, dependent origination, how things exist by means of dependency. So it is actually the ultimate mode of abiding of the object. This is what we can understand as emptiness.
Yes. And it's down into the Ninal Dakars or Tonica Chick Tondal Chidani Kuni Komanyara Tangachi Tachi teaching Kars looked to that in on Kuni Komanyung get in the young Isra. And that is Konyung character use.
And it's going
Chidani Tonya Tombanis in the country Kuni Komanyung get in the young Isra.
So first I want to ask whether in this class there are people that have never heard about the term emptiness.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. That Tony said that come Mebaji Marizat. So Tony Sena and so Sanji come the Sanji country songs and a Temjong Tonga song racer. Kanji and the Temjong Main Bichunga Yopama, the Tomba Main Bichunga Yopama, and the Tomba turned in the Temjong in Bijim Sanga, and the Tony Shede racer. What in the race?
So yes, in general, emptiness, we should not understand it as just absolute nothing or something like this. The Buddha explained emptiness as by means of dependent origination, that this is something that has the meaning of dependent arising. So there is also one quote which kind of establishes this kind of idea, which says that there is no any phenomena which is not dependent arising. And since there is not any phenomena which is not dependent arising, there is no phenomena which is not empty. So this is also kind of a quote which explains how emptiness and dependent origination they have like the kind of the same.
So that so Tony said and Dame Pasi or and Dame Pasi Batella Tatela and Tachirong Dame Pasiato. And Cheshita and cousin Dajitan Cheshikala Matubi and Taramuni Tubachila and Dajan Temepa Shats a new resra. And the Daze on Tanya to be and the Daze and in Sumshi resra. And the damage Datela Sumshi resra.
So actually emptiness we can also understand it as selflessness. And with regards to the self, among the word selflessness, so we can enumerate 3 types of self. So first of all, there is the self which is singular, permanent, and independent. This is one type of self. Second type of self is a self which is established from its own side, not dependent on any parts. This is the second type of self. The third type of self is a self which is existent conventionally. So we can enumerate 3 types of self, among like from the word self in selflessness.
Yes. And that damage with Tony Canilin Tatubangonita, Chimata, Dajitan Cheshi, Georgia Tobasola Matuba, and the Ron Tubachura, Tela Gajaga Dajani, Teme Patela, and Tombaniti, Anita. Yiki Tangomate Tinichila Showers, Tatela, and Nelin Tati to Tombani Sevores.
So then with regards to the self, which doesn't depend on any parts, doesn't depend on any kind of thing which establishes it, and just dependent, and just existent, not dependent on anything else, this is the self which is to be refuted. And the absence of this self, this is what we can understand as emptiness, or the ultimate mode of abiding of the object, like ultimate reality of the object.
나서 다 던세 동버 틴디지 마치 아니 던세 니바다 다 동녀라 또 또바치나 구바 가려요래서 티강시 시행이라 아니 소다 다 동바니 템종스나 아니 템종스야다 아니 니지스야다 가르스나 다 상지의 주문부 소빈노니 다지 돈다 힘분로지 아니 티니라 동바다 템종라 템종 아니 템종도 다 tawa temjong de choban chawam ba jora on tini le thidi resra on tini ta anta ta sangji ge jelam de sam da tri taba thanjin jimba ta ajang jang da ani chenda la ani gungko yo ba ji si ge jang na ani jang yo ba taba yo me tan chuli tem de chama ge pena cherik jang no ji ani toni ge tuen sa de si jang na ani jang ji yo ba de jang chawa ji ta ten bi lam ni ke ba chi yo ba ji on tini ji resra.
So this was the first point with regards to what is emptiness. And then we are moving forward to the second point, which is what is the need of analyzing the meaning of emptiness. So among all of the teachings of the Buddha, we can say that emptiness or dependent arising, it becomes one of it becomes the main or the very essence of the teachings of the Buddha. And also there is one way of presenting the teaching of the Buddha as being divided into the view of dependent origination and the non-violent conduct. So these kind of things, as well as emptiness, these are things that if we can apply in our life, this is something that actually is very beneficial in terms of this life. And also is not really related to whether we are people that accept religion or follow a certain religion or not, whether we have faith in the Buddha or not. This is something just like science that can be examined and investigated, and something that can actually be of benefit in our lives.
Asani tagarasore mare dichirat ni jishi sare ta tombanis tirawa 이거더라 이거대요. 간디시 고트서 무지데 기단게 다 돈이 된치요라 레르다니 돈이라 도치치비 고바카레요레세 되니 마지 시어지라 다 돈이라 도치치고가 카레레스는 아서 아니 돈이세나 얘기는 아니 좀 마저 아니 정말 모두 심지 어느 소셜 컨디션이나 아니 대완도라 등한문도 봐도 징총 대왕이 직용이 좀 바치레스라 다 아니 등하더니 등하그 제초디 아니 다 산지비가 가르송 거르스나 안도차지다 등습니다 아니 문진나 그래서라 등하그 자원이데 단도차다 제단이 그 자와든 문이데요 등 안에 단지인바 아니 문진나 그래서라 아니 동보 아니 pena padida trabi tomba ngaji dalaji dagi mujin dala chachi bazya ngaji ane tombo ane nganzi ki ngazi ane danzi ki tiong ane sogo nyeng ta gasa chola chapa ane jin chola dangwa ki ro tiong ane lenda masabin khwala kui ane ramba ta dingal nyoy ramba tindi shi go resa yimba inzani tombo ane danzin sa te munzin ye kachimbo resra.
So then I want to continue explaining about the need of examining and investigating the meaning of emptiness. So emptiness, as we said, this is how things are actually exist. This is, we can say, the meaning of emptiness. And then in general, if we are talking about sentient beings, whatever kind of sentient beings, we are all the same in terms of wanting happiness and not wanting suffering, right? And if we are talking about the cause of suffering, so from the perspective of Buddhism, we can say that these are what we call the three poisons. The three poisons are the attachment, anger, and ignorance. So with regards to attachment and anger, their root is the ignorance, which we can also name as the self-grasping. And there is also one quote by Acharya Chandrakirti, And in this quote, he says that first with the third eye, there is the clinging to the self. Then with the third mind, the attachment to things arise. So basically the meaning of this quote is that first there is the attachment to the self. And then after we have the attachment to the self, then we develop the attachment to those who are close to us, to our friends. And respectively, we also develop some kind of hostility or anger to those which are not close to us, to our kind of enemies or those who are far from us. And by generating these types of attitude, this is the way in which we generate the causes for roaming in the samsara, or what we can also call as the cyclic existence. Just keep on cycling in the cyclic existence. And this is actually a presentation of the stages in which we give birth, which we give rise to the suffering in our life. And therefore, it is very important itself to identify the self-grasping, which is the root of all of this suffering.
Also, tan do cha da je dan ya an thoma ani danza mari bali ke gere ke dan chin re na danza se da ani kaung de shiba na je ani ye kang la tu me ke rawan chaban zamba chila ani da se da ye kang la tu me ke rawan zamba chila ani danza ja gere sra an tele ndo cha je dan kan ri ke gere se na penas ra ani ta ye ta kepa pame chige ta kepa pame chile ya ane chaba yena tombo chabi ane kepa de pame ni tan ta chi ni yette gongwa ta ane jiba tindi ta ore sra kanza de lo par ta ba mai ba ye kungo ni phajon cha thamche ni yonden ta ani kin jiba chi ta gres de na je ane ra ye chila da ta ba yena ane da de ni cho thamche ni ko ane kyun ji rang jin ta mdi ba chi ane ta de gre sra de ang pa lo ta ba mai ba ye 코런 그 차탐전이 아니 그 무디바지 다 되고 그래서 어딘지 그 따와데 아니 단전 당 자리 마도 이 단전 어디 단전샤 띠옹게 아니 예텔라 아니 차바다 예텔라 당와데 아니 기고 그래서 이 원장 아니 가진 차탐전이 파길라야 예도 공화지도 예도 모아제 요리 요 말즈나 요 말에서 이 얘기 때니까 세 아니 개바범인 지바당 양나 다 아니 Mudibase Yutini Yobayana, see on that Penanga Chapi Yochila, and see Tibayana Chabakia, ni down Yutela, and the Genjika and Tabayana, and the Mudibajan Tongoreta, the Council Tamshep and Tongumundo Hazra, Pena Nini Chapi Yutela, Genji down Kiring, down Yutela, Genji Chabaki, Tekarsana, and Pasho Yetini and Ramuni maybe Jim sent the Insares. Montase.
So we said that the attachment and the anger, which we can also name as hatred, both arise from the self-grasping, right? And then what is actually the meaning of self-grasping, the ignorance that we talked about? So the self-grasping is apprehending the object to be established not by means of dependency on anything else, but just independently. This kind of grasping, this kind of apprehending of the reality of the object, this is what we name as the self-grasping. So if we give an example for self-grasping, let's say that a boy has an attachment to girl, like a man has attachment to woman, or a woman has an attachment to man. In this kind of instance, what is happening is that when we have attachment to a certain male or female, we see that male or female to be pleasant or to be attractive, like only attractive. We only see the male or the female to be attractive 100%, without any kind of side of non-attractiveness or non-pleasant aspects. We see them 100% attractive. And we also perceive the person at that time to be attractive from his own side. Not like this is something which was imputed or designated by means of our mind, but something which is actually being established on the object itself, on the person itself. And this is the same also with our enemies. So when we have an enemy, so then we perceive the enemy to be 100% with faults, 100% non-attractive. And we also perceive it not that this kind of negative aspects of this person is something which is being imputed from our mind, but something which is actually being present with the object itself. So these kind of examples are what we can call as instances of the self-grasping. And from this kind of self-grasping, the attachment and the anger and so forth are arising. But actually, if we try to ask this question, whether our friends or our enemies, whether they are actually existent as we perceive them, whether they are actually 100% attractive or 100% non-attractive, only with faults, so the answer is no. Because if it was the case that actually what we project on the object was actually existent within the object, so these following consequences would follow. So let's say that the object that we have attachment to, if all the attractiveness, if all the attractive sides or aspects of the object were within the object, were on top of the object, so it would follow that everyone should also have seen the object in the same manner, also like 100% attractive, and also to have attachment towards this object. And it would be also the same with the object towards which we have anger or hatred. So if all the unpleasant or unattractive sides of the object as we perceive it was actually existent within or on top of the object, so all the other people would also have to see it in the same way, and would also have to generate anger and hatred towards this kind of object. But we can see that it's not the case, right? This is not that the object towards which we have attachment to, we see them 100% attractive, so all of the people are seeing them like that, right? It's not like this is the way that things exist. And also in the same manner with regards to the object that we have anger towards. So this is some kind, we can say that this is a proof that things are not, that all these kind of things are not established from their own side.
So, then somebody dame topi tablam se as kan she de wasra. Digo she wala tanga so chedan ane dame me chigla ore ane chedan nga so len kila kan she ore nga ni cha chi ni ane sam tango sti ane len kila lo te ore sra. A chocho kamachila ane da se ade chikche sho da sra. Chedan nga samba ane date ane kawan do sra. Nigendu kan nigendu pombol nigendu kan nigendu. ane 지 까마칠 직제다 스라 ane 다들 간이 얘기도 스라 안 직제 제로 치스.
So then we can move forward to the third point regarding the method of understanding selflessness or emptiness. So usually we can say that we are saying that there is no self, such as we described, and so forth. But actually the way that the things appear to our mind is that there is always this kind of I or I that appears in our mind, that is we have a very, very strong sense of this I. So therefore I want to ask you to look for this I that appears in our mind, where we can actually find it. So I want you to take 1 minute and try to find this type of I, whether we can find it within our physical or mental aggregates. Where is this kind of I? Yes, so I want to ask you just to reflect on this for 1 minute. Yes, so therefore I want you to look for it. If you need to pause it, if you need to say this is the I, what kind of illustration will you give to the I? Where is this kind of I?
나서 되지. 이제서 나한테 니서 니긴 아마 자로치스로 가니 니송스로. 그래서 나가 니사리 성성르지 가른도스로.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I want to ask you, after searching for this eye, if you found some kind of eye, so I want to ask you where did you find this eye? What you can say that this is the eye that you found?
Well, I found myself, I reflect about myself in a certain social identity, and I perceive myself through the senses. So the senses is like the first limitation of the eye, I think, as I perceive myself through the senses. But not just that, because my identity has a lot of roots and branches with many social environments. So I think the I that I perceive is related to others in their way, no? But it's filtered with the senses.
I just want to make sure that I understood. So you're saying that the eye is being filtered by your senses?
No, the eye.
Mm-hmm.
The I is like a social identity that I have in many spaces, but that thing is filtered by the senses. Yes.
Nasete chitsugino da yope na shigres. Yani nasete na kare togne te regiure serba paina. Na narangi wanko. Narangi wanshe gipo. Shepa igon. Todo sha. Narangi shepa gi. Ta chitsugino da yope nate. Shingres.
저런 삼문들 리샤더라. 아니 다나 상집이 좀 다가 나와야. 아니 나한테 문제 진개가 대망보여서 가시 가르는 본부 초발 대가래서니로 상집이 따로 걸어놓는다. 다지라마다 전다 제목 것이라. 아니 전탄 가지게 수고니 본부들이 지금 본부지라 대다래라는 거지. 가시가 아니 이기 남시디 다래라고 그래. 가르는 남시디 아니 교황만 만든다니 치마온 아니 데리라고 그래서라. 이나 다 오마 탱기위 두서야 까되고 그래서라. 남시다는 본부 초바 참아 다임바드 가르즈나 안투소 니 남시라고 그러면 나 남시라고 그래서라. 니 본부라고 마또 아니 본부 다드임발라 노지 본부 템바래서라. 본부도 나 신도에는 본부들 한도 그래서 아래 다세드 드닝가마 드니 치만도 아시데오다. 본부도 늘 하데 그래. 아주 시타데 메다단제도 본부고 텔라찬도라 아래. 어딘데 지기 전이야. 본부 다마임바드 리라본도 시그르스. 다 남시자 지오라. 남시 다마임바드 데서 가본도스 아니 시고르 대한 남시 다 문제 징게 그래서. 나한테 네 바데다 잡아라서가 아니 고볼도 오마 탄지와다 지 오마바 아니 침보나고 바카샤요 그래서라. 대한 가서 다마에 다그녀 롱교자 다그 간지 롱교자는 하고도 어딘지 저래마 다그 잘라서 다 샤메바 나신데 어디래 되라고 그래서라.
So in general, what you said is quite fine. Your suggestion, sorry, and also within the different kind of philosophical schools in the Buddhist philosophy. So there are kind of different assertions regarding what is I, or what is the illustration, like what we can posit as the I. So some say that I is actually the collection of the aggregates, the physical aggregate, the physical body, and the mental aggregate, like our mind. So some assert that this is the I. Some assert that the I is actually the aggregate itself, whether the physical or the mental. And some say that I is the primary mental consciousness. Some say that this is the I, our mental consciousness. And actually they give a reason for it. The reason is that our mental consciousness, this is something which is going, just like the eye, it is going from one life to the next life continuously. And therefore, since there is the eye which goes from one life to the next life, and in the same way, our mental consciousness is also going from one life to the next life, so they assert that the mental consciousness is the actual illustration that we can give for the eye. And yes, but then in the higher school of the Buddhism, the Madhyamika consequential, the middle way consequentially, I don't know, consequentialist, sorry, the middle way consequentialist school. So they say in this school that our mental consciousness, though there are a lot of assertions that our mental consciousness is the I, and actually it's a bit hard to refute this kind of assertion, they say that our mental consciousness, this is our mental consciousness, and this is not, and it's not like we are saying I am mental consciousness, right? Even when we are talking about our mental consciousness, we say my mental consciousness or my body, right? So refuting the assertion, for example, that the body is the I, this is something which is quite simple, because the body, after we die, so just getting rotten, and there is no any kind of reason to assert that the body is the I. We just burn it like this, and this is not something that is like the self, which is going from the previous life to the next life and just continuing like this. And the body is not like this, and therefore this is a bit easy to assert that I is not the body. And as we said, with regard to the mental consciousness, in the middle way consequentialist school, they say that the I is like that the mental consciousness, this is something which is being used by the I. This is something which is being kind of employed by the I. Just like a thing that we have, just kind of a property that we have. And therefore, since we don't say that, let's say for example, my phone is this is my phone, right? This is not I don't say I am the phone. In the same manner, we don't say that I am the mental consciousness. We say that this is my mental consciousness, and therefore, we should say that I is not the mental consciousness.
So,
Can I ask something about the about emptiness? Okay, to ask about emptiness. Jesus said, we are not divided. Emptiness means that anything is connected to anything else. If I understand what he said, then our precision and the way we see things, as they are separate from us, as they have their own existence and they are separate from us, and then we have thoughts and thinking about other things. And actually, emptiness means nothing is separate from us, and then I understand it as everything is connected. If nothing is separated from me, then I am connected to any object or any other person, which maybe means that if I continue this idea that nothing is separated, the idea that you presented, then we are in some strange way, we are all one. Is that true, or is this the direction?
그래서 concordato lenson ta genagi sunkalatena na concordato ta insalatena chot sangma chokarena ya telesente chot sangma tam jelwa yures ta gani sana tendro di por la decisión venga a mi se non perna gena kare son sana te perna haram sullo e trovne
lui parta so to parta
ani konko karelen tainis karelen son serna ta chokare inayan ten na chokare inayan ten na so tan jelmo medio ten de yomares ani chesa kansan kare inayan ten chokare inayan na tan jelwa yore Anichesan, Natsotsan, Chigre. Tendrishila Paina, Jigres, Tatoni Vitona Tendrishila.
Chigreda Lao Marta, Tangaso Chi, 10 years and degrees. Also, Tangason Zambolin, Zambol Chila, 10 years, Jiso Simpson, Chila, Pats 10 years of Batangra, and the Matemban Suni Motowata, and the Shen and degrees. T. Goni, and the Taranji Mebas in the cook. Tuba maybe dam meba this shan and degrees. And also Chigrela, the lie of Samaris.
So it is not like we are all one, like everything, like all the persons and all the things are all one, but we can say that we are all dependent on each other. This is what we can say, we are all existent dependently. So we can give an example of society or different things on our earth. We can say that we all must exist by means of dependency on each other, and otherwise there is no way for us to survive without being dependent on each other. So this is the way that we can understand the absence of kind of intrinsically existent, so absence of inherent existence is the meaning of a dependent arising.
Yes.
That's a point. So why do we call it emptiness or selflessness instead of interdependence?
Why do we call emptiness and not interdependence? Tony la Tony shera ko pigyong san kare, Tony la tendel mala pigyong san kare.
Mala pigyong san kare. Otadi talangat di siya tino mayona silin de tesare sera. Joko tombo tongni lawa de kanji lawa san adi indara. Toma ngazo tongni la kwa de chabala ane gajang munsen badra. Da yo marese chi da chiora. Oti munsen togo ade kechimbo somores. Tanda joala tabingula ma tingumen zama isa jo. Bena chi gosongji imba chi gosongji imba cha jabaina. Kaza ni ta Itamar zet na tama ola baina ro. Itamar ngoshi koresra. Idaba ngoma shinai nana yana ko kana chama kaungare. Yana tanana yana chama taungaresra. Ko get kibar jimba cha jarwa. Idama na tama ola baina. Idama get kibar te ngoshi koresra. Ngoma shibaina ko kana chama kaungara. Chama kyamana yana chama taungare tinishires. Imba inzani toma tonyela chi kuande chi cha kanji misama toma ngaso gacha se da meza te munjin chi at kechimboresra. Te an ta chi munjin bi tapro talamro mambo chi sonre ina chi tan cha desho ro ta chi yasho to ngaso la nganjin henchi chi nganjin henchi chora ngara samba chora ti nga kanji ji nang yo nang se de munjin na ane danzu munjin baresra. O nang se na ji yo ta metan ba be mebangi ba da ane toni shagre. Nganjin henchi la nga chata no nang du sam chembate ane karate hakwate ane gacha de munjin baresra. Ta te munjin bi tham rajin na pena so je dan trabon de chi bi kapse ro. Ane chola chi yana chi mi chi kumare la yana chi chog chi ame chi se sha sin chi so ma chi chi che so zan so lo kongro chi bu ji za gro. O kap ti la kan zin so ndi la chi kala tume nga shang shang chi to ba ane te rangun yo ba ta chi nga so nyo i trap ji yo resra. O tindi ge da chi yo ma ri shi de go resra. Che no tindi ge da chi yo ma ri chi to ba rang pomba la tume ke rang i da chi yo ma ri shi de go. Te dame ba sha ge resra. Tomba ni se te resra. O te res. Tombo ke chi jo te.
So I think that what I'm going to explain now, it will answer your question. So when we are talking about emptiness, at first this is important to understand or to recognize what is the object that we're actually negating by talking about emptiness. So we talked about this selflessness, right? So the self, among the word selflessness, this type of self, at first we need to recognize it, like what is actually absent, what is actually not existent, and it is need to be refuted or negated. So there is the quote from Acharya Shantideva in his book, in his text, The Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life. which is says that if you're not engaged, if you're not literally, if you're not touching the object, you cannot say that it is not existent. So what does it mean? Actually, it means that if, for example, I want to say that Itamar is not in the classroom, so at first I need to understand who is Itamar. If I don't know who is Itamar, I cannot say that Itamar is not in the classroom. And if I have to refute or to affirm Itamar while not knowing who is Itamar, so what will happen is that either I have to say that each one of you is Itamar, or either I have to say that none of you is Itamar. And then I have to throw you, all of you out of the class, or to say that all of you are Itamar. So at first I need to know who is Itamar in order to get rid of Itamar, right? In order to say that he's in the class or not in the class. So this is at first what I need to do. And therefore, at first, identifying the object of negation, the self, which is the object of negation, this is very, very important. So there are few methods to do it. And among all of these methods, one of them is a really, really kind of easy method for us to apply. So this kind of method is trying to identify this kind of this what we can call this innately arising I in our mind. There is the I which is kind of automatically arising in our mind. And this kind of I, whatever appears in our mind, this kind of I, this what we can identify as the self which is to be negated, which is we can identify it as the object of negation, as the self. And understanding that the self, how it appears to our mind, is not existence. So the absence of this kind of self, this is what we can call as emptiness. So understanding that the self is not existent as it appears to our mind, this is what we can call an understanding of emptiness. So we can give an example of how we can actually apply this method. So let's say that someone is calling me a thief while I actually didn't steal anything. So at that time, most of us will get angry, right? If someone is calling us thief and actually we didn't engage in any kind of action of stealing. So at that mind, when we get anger, when we get angry in our mind, this kind of self which is existent from its own side, doesn't depend on anything else, a kind of self-sustaining self. This type of image of the self will arise in our mind at that moment. And this is what we can understand, this is what we can recognize as self which is to be negated. That which is and not dependent on the aggregates, doesn't depend on anything else. That very self that arises in our mind at that time, this is the recognition of the self which is to be refuted. And the absence of this self, this is what we can describe as emptiness.
So, ni tapi pe lilabon disgani chachabayina. Njozo ya tabayina ngi lagano glass chandu tingresra. Ani laba chandu samgres ngi. Na glass dilengi laba kandi chandu sina. Ndi phaju chojoni tela ni laba changu mato. Ani glass te ka laba changsa te dikap tu direni glass reo marara. Dikoptan chat kani laba dirin changora. Nandi ka da nanda japtereni ni glass ja to mara ro ina nga so pa samsar nga so samgola ani dil glass jinda laba chandu samsam ji phagil de glass ni laba nandu samsam ji yore sra ani glass te ka re je chen ro na ani nye de me pa ji re sra o tir ta de te nye de me pa te ani ta tomba ni ke ton tri ja go re sra ina glass ji yore sra glass ji nga so ni to be on ja cham ko ina thanye te the glass yo chitani glass meba resina pet meba maresra glass nga tunji chulusa glass chiyor de na maso no na jing pagil ni labana dirichin do samsam go ani pagil labana dirichin do samsam de yo mare pe lo par tabasam resra ni glass ki chad chaji de ni glass tabasam remato ani yengo ni nga so na jing ani glass chi yo mare ani laba changa ra go maresra 어떻게 penso lilabo di condition condition charge.
So I want to give a certain easy example to understand like the meaning of emptiness. So now when I hold this glass, when you see it, so you think in your mind, like it will arise, like you'll have like this kind of idea that I'm holding the glass, right? That I'm holding like this, the glass. But then if you start to analyze and start to ask like, what am I actually holding? I'm only holding this kind of side and this kind of side, right? And then we'll ask like whether this kind of side is the glass, this kind of side is the glass. Can we positive is the glass? In the same manner, can we say that this, like the bottom of the glass is the glass, that the upper part of the glass is the glass? Then when we'll actually try to analyze where is the glass that I'm holding, so we won't be able to find anything and say this is the glass. And this inability, this not finding anything after searching for the object, this is the meaning of emptiness. But it doesn't mean that the glass is not existent, right? Because the glass conventionally existent. We can say that the glass is existent merely by mental imputation, merely by conceptual, by imputation of our conceptual cognition. This is the mode in which we can say that the glass is actually existent. This is something which exists by means of terms and conventionally. But if we ask like whether the glass is existent as it appears to us, so the answer is no. The glass doesn't exist in the way that it appears to us. But we can say that the glass existent as an imputation based on its parts, on the different parts of the glass. We can say that the mind can impute the glass, but still it doesn't existent in the way that it appears to us. So this is a simple example for explaining the meaning of emptiness.
네, 언디리지르다. 제가 아주 나나진 글라스지 문도다니 나 글라스지 안에 떼니 안에 따고 그래서라 나나지메 바 메바 가르즈나고 글라스디 방아서 로그 따바장 거봐 자인산이 tomba temjong tombi ton temjong rezade terezra najin de meba ani rajinji meba karezna ko teni tabare ezra galas de ranguni mundu aspa lui para ne teni taba samrendo as tomba ton temjong yezade ani tinji sare ezra.
So therefore we can say that the glass doesn't existent in the way that it appears, but still it existent. It existent dependently on something else. And why we cannot say that the glass is existent as it appears, or that the glass is existent inherently or intrinsically? The reason is that this is something which is only designated based on something else, the glass. And since the glass is designated based on something else, this is the way that it appears. So therefore, when we say that the meaning of empty or the meaning of emptiness is dependent on origination, this kind of example we can give and understand it from this kind of example.
Tunse jebad so ane toni ke tun sambai na so timre ke tun samgore esra ane da ji jizen jembe ang ane jirumbo chile manga tindi yoresra tombo ane tomba ta temjong ni ke noni ane nan chod de jo zo nzi su song na jinde ma zo ni tomba ke tun sambala temjong ke tun jizen samba ke toni la ane tani rin do resra toni ke tun ara ane that damage toni dribi rupa mambo yoga non so ane temre ke tun samba da resra that tina rupa nang ko so ngoni ta ane temre ke tun ane samba da resra that temre ke tun la ane chisam sambe ane bhasha ko rangu da rajini phadi yetin indu samsam da ane lo chechong ni chachang ro ta ane dele ji je kandi ji na panzu tudu ke se yo ba sra chu kandi ji na panzu ane tin yo ba ma to ma tembar ane kangla tume ke rangwa chi yo ba ta ane katho re sra temjong ke tun sam ta toni ke tun ni ba sam dang ke china so da ne temjong temre la sam dang go re sra ote ke chim bo re sra ane kaza oh naso ane ta 동니 그 돈을 삼는 담아도 소소 땜정을 삼는 담고래서라 돈이 드비르바 난그 다르바는 소다네 땜정 그르바도 송대 그래서라 라 땜정라 저들 안 삼는 담바이나 파쇼니 얘기되는 가서 되게 시행마가라스 파티 때니 요 삼삼지때 아니 로데 아니 제정의 제정 다고 로데 아니 다그 도그레즈라 로데 아니 식총리 도그레즈라 어디 그랬더니 텔라 템빙 가서 아니 템정 그던도 삼바임바이나 당 가서 선지나 아니 가라 마템바요 말해서라 소소 펑볼라 텐데오르 다르지는 다 펑보 자체제라 텐데오르 지고네마라 텐데오르 지탄쿠라 텐데오르 아니 김상라 텐데오르 께소라 텐데오르 대 가라 마템바 소소 손이 도문으로서라 소고더니요 템정 그던 삼바요레서라 소고도 다 템제라 차라 모보시비노니 다 차드 저거라 아래 또 빌로 파타서 마도 이때니 메바지고라 로고 파타서 지고라 다티니 템제 차모자 되고래서라
para kata sama tu orang mundur.
네.
Ambil tas itu. So now we can move forward to the fourth point, and this point is regarding that if you want to reflect on the meaning of emptiness, we should actually reflect on the meaning of dependent arising, dependent origination. And there was also a brief instruction that was given from Manjushri to Jetson Kappa. And in this instruction, Manjushri is instructing Jetson Kappa to hold the side of what is appearing among that which is appearing, the emptiness. It's a bit difficult to translate it. Let's say that there are like two things, the appearance and the emptiness. So Manjushri is telling Tsongkhapa from among these two things to hold the appearance very, very importantly, to regard the appearance, the side of appearance very, very importantly. And also if we are talking about the reasons that establishes or that proving the emptiness, we can say that there are a lot of reasons and a lot of different reasonings, but the main one of them is what we call the reasoning of interdependence, the reasoning of dependent origination. So what will be the consequences or the effects if we reflect more about interdependence? So if we reflect more about interdependence, we'll have less this kind of idea that things are established from their own side. We'll have less this kind of grasping and ideas. And also we'll have less this kind of perceiving, we'll have less the way in which we perceive the reality, which me or like other persons are established, not dependent, not by means of dependency. We'll understand that this is something which is impossible to posit a person which is not dependent on his aggregates, his physical aggregate or mental aggregate, dependent on the society, dependent on the food that he eats, dependent on his clothing, and so forth. This is something that we'll understand more and more, that this is something which is an impossible way of existence, that the person must survive or must live dependent on all of these kind of things. So, therefore, if we are talking about the most subtle level of interdependence, this is the interdependence of how things are not existent from its own side, from their own side, but existent just merely by means of a mental imputation. So this is the most subtle level of interdependence.
나서 스테즈요나 그러죠. 그래 템제 같은 삼바데레스라 다 템제 같은 데라 아니 고마모니 삼바 아니 지치 템제야 들어 아니 차라 차단 체진도 조진지나 고야라도 들었더니 답아서야 지오라 아니 또빈데 파리자자마도 이게 때님에 비해서 아니 때문에 아니 숨쉬고 그래서 그래서 다 상기가 아니 좀비 다 가르쳐 그랬다 다치랑 전그 다세도 저 캠는 도와줘 가서 때문에 남자한테 아니 killing by 인산이 저 때문에 되고 그래서 아니 좀
Na pasangi pateso tashera changi dat kamane
so ngaso daze de keminto ina danga so go da meze de jedan daze de chuni mebaresina yang tanye de yubi daji killing go resra to bi pharta samgo daji killing go yang da mebaresina yo daze de number thamje meba yin samate samgo maresra 아니 또비 파다 samgo da killing go resra pombola teni tapi daji killing go resra ani jambazo ngaso na odi pombola matin bi daji shagora 어때 요 말랍도 뭐 제단이 다치니 요 말라고 막 톰pom보라 떼니 답다 또 비타선 그 다지 캐는 거래서라 어디 다시 그랬어
And when we are talking about the reflecting on the meaning of interdependence, we can talk about different kind of levels of interdependence. So we can talk about the interdependence of cause and effect, we can talk about the interdependence of parts and whole, and we can also talk about the interdependence, as I described just now, the interdependence of the merely imputation by the mind, the merely imputed by conceptual thinking. So we have different levels of interdependence. And with regards to Buddhists, the reason that they don't accept a self that is permanent, singular, independent, the reason that Buddhists don't accept this type of self is that Buddhists accept the presentation of interdependence. So because of accepting the presentation of interdependence, Buddhists doesn't accept this type of existence of self. But whether we'll ask if Buddhists doesn't accept an existence of self at all, whether there is no self in Buddhism, so this is not the case. There is self, but the self that is being the self which is being posited or asserted in Buddhism, it is a self which is dependent on the aggregates, a self which is conventionally existent by means of dependency. And otherwise it is not like Buddhism doesn't assert self which is existent in the way that it appears to us. Some kind of self which doesn't depend on its parts or its aggregates, and just can exist independently. So this kind of self is not existent according to Buddhism.
와서 다 담아든 지금 되자라 저도 내가 저 무슨 그 강연을 가려면 저도 이전에 저마저 마시 받더라 어때다 어느 잘자 제위 삼바도 시트라비 시트라다 매비kin 아니 근데 영화 샤탄로 지리 되어 뭐제 강가 마치더라 다 때문에도 돈이 그던라 아니 지 아서 삼론지 담바이나 아니 이전에 저때 저마저 시바이나 대강이 강연용도 좋았다 아니 지 템정 같은 데서 삼바이나 반서 저거 반세이나래 아니 주초이나래 아니 직다 겸상 그 참되이나 강 귀찮이야 아니 되게 템제 같은 삼로 담바이나 아니 제이 삼바된 거래서 제이 삼바대 아니 대인 거래 아니 강자진 그 같은 초하다 아니 저 삼시제야도 삼마도 아니 잠세글로도 아니 공패 연구요래서 어디게 짐생 그 아니 템정당 아니 잠세글로도 공바이나 아니 뭐지 강가 뭐지 센터하다 아니 뭐지 대야 아니 대기 된바지 용사를 했어
돈이 단단히 삼바이
돈이 템적부터 삼나
So therefore, in order to give a summary for this talk, we can say that all the problems that are arising in our life are a result of not understanding how things are actually exist, and also having a very, very weak loving mind towards others. We can say that based on these two things, all of the problems that we have in our life are arising. And actually, if we'll be able to understand the meaning of emptiness and the meaning of dependent origination, so the problems in our life will definitely, their intensity will definitely be decreased. And also, if you think more about the side of dependent arising, whether we are talking about family, whether we are talking about society, we can definitely have more love towards each other and to have more gratitude towards other people around us. So this is the way in which reflecting on the meaning of emptiness and the meaning of dependent arising is something that can give us a lot of happiness in our life and decrease the problems that we have in our life.
Try and say this down. Try and try. So much harder. Try and try.
Yeah, so I want to say thank you. And also now, if you have questions, if there was something during the lecture that was not very clear for you, so you're more than welcome to ask it right now, or if you have any kind of other question.
I didn't understood quite well the difference system between the three selves. I didn't understand.
Dinle gola genagi tak sum tamindra sungi korla. Shesama. Ani teso ke korna shira komaso.
Aso. 당아서 다치롱 쟁게 다세서 시거래서 다데니 다치로 저러 바다가 장전마다 장만 가서 원치서 다바다 집어 라오이 다세서 시거랑 가서 원집어 다세서 시거래 시거라 다치롱 쟁게 다음에 가서 지시 다시 뜻이거라 대니 다 저러 바도 킬린데요 시래서 양조는 본보다 아니 마투비 본보다 투메크랑 다세죠라 어따티 조테 가셔시아 가셔테레스라 양 단계 등가서 디디뇽어 초앙이 강뇽소가 초앙뇽소 삼보 다지요라 다데 아니 대탄이디 요바 다데 킬링 탄이디 요바데레스 동분이도 어느 사이는 잠부터 봐라 저로비가레 따바 주보랑 강사지 킬링 거라 어때요 말해서라 양 아니 가서로 담아고 놓서라 본보다 투메크랑 다지 놓는데거라 어때요 말이라고 그래서 동분이도 되지라 아니 본보다 땐바 잠고 파르타 잠고 아니 다지요레스 대 아니 킬링 거래 다 킬링 거래서 좀더 더더시
So, if to summarize these three types of self, we can explain the first type of self as the self which is permanent, singular, and non-dependent, independent. This self which has these three kinds of characteristics. This is the self which is asserted by non-Buddhists, such as different Indian philosophical schools, such as the Samkhya school, and so forth. So this is one type of self. And this type of self, the Buddhists assert that is non-existent. The second type of self, this is what we can identify as the actual object of negation, the actual object of refutation. And this is the self which is existent not by depending on the aggregates, whether we are talking about the physical aggregate or the mental aggregate. Aggregate is this is a note of the translator. Aggregate is a certain kind of term, but basically we can also understand it as a physical body and mind. So, self which doesn't depend on these two, this is the second type of self. The third type of self, this is the self which is actually asserted by Buddhists, and it is the self which is feeling, which is experiencing, which is conventionally existent. This is the self which is being merely imputed by conceptual thought based on the aggregates. So these are the three types of self. Okay, if you have any.
I'm sorry, this is a very interesting. It's very difficult to understand because the topic is very difficult. I want to ask the teacher if it is possible to explain simple words for a simple person how the fact that I understand that the other people that I see around me are not separate from me. How is it to explain how this fact is? How can I use it to have a better life? Okay, I understand that we are connected in a certain way, and I'm not sure I understand what is the self, but I know I wake up in the morning with myself. How can I improve my life, my attitude for the world and for myself, and apply it in my daily life?
Lesoni nata nashinchepe kansala, nata nashinchepe eletan poala, taptanshete dis, rachoka kuchungsons, taganisena joshite dis kapore vasopani, ta chetsa kesi genagi, ta terengi sheate, dis dordune, nerana kayola yogi perana unico paina ta per contende da persona sonata canta scenda gelwa yopate ako sonta nata canta sama na so penso gelwa yotote na disco son ina yante tope gone te tope tone te narangi nitsela tento yongwatan ta ren narangi nitsela te yagetanya ta karere ta kayola yogi tone ta samotanda genagi kandishi shetuna
나서서 그래 칼을 나고 나서 삼당하데 네 맞을 행기를 지금 다지 가르 삼성전에 지금 강라 뚜무고 삼성지 그래서라 다 지보서 아니 지금 더설 들려요 그래서라 야본로도 직본로서 솔 들려 뚜무고 삼성지 그래서라 이나 바 단도는 거니 니버도 아니 템바지 마토 아니 뚜무고 요마래서라 네 주소 간디 간서 서지나 펜 jar본지나 수저 롬보 타마미수 텐데오라 코소 메이나 고요마라 아래 아니 주본지 메이나 그런 거 디어나 그런 거 레모도 참아 간지 찬 텐데오라 간라 뚜미고 삼삼지오르라 네 펜나 김산이 지어나 자문이나 판자를 뚜빈디시 제자요나 군인 참되는 거라서 마뚜바지 간라 뚜미고 삼삼디오이나 군일라 만탐바다더니 저 군인이 라디오 것도 그래서 바주 뚜뚜가 남자라 제점상나 맞을라 펜도 진보 용사레스 대공당에다 저 저지자도 디저지도 타본의 제담상아 띵통거래더니 저 공단을 버지라 야버지 나랑가 야버지든.
So I want to say sorry because actually it's the first time and maybe I chose a bit difficult topic to discuss about. So I want to apologize. And regarding a practical way in which we can think or apply these ideas in our life, so the way that things automatically appears to our mind is that things are existent not by means of dependency. The things that doesn't have to depend, doesn't have to exist interdependent, in an interdependent manner. And a very, very apparent example that we have is of a king or of a very, very rich person, that they have this kind of idea or attitude that I'm here, I don't need to depend on anyone else or anything else for having what I have, for being who I am, and so forth, right? But actually, if we really try to reflect on this, so actually the king depends on his army, on the people that he rules, and so forth. So it is not, and if they were not existent, the king couldn't also be a king or existent, right? And this is something that we can also apply this way of thinking. We can also apply to a smaller kind of a group of people. So let's talk even about family or a couple. So a couple, if they have this kind of perception that they need to depend on each other, they are mutually interdependent, if a couple will have this kind of perception, so the problems will be much less within the relationship, and also disharmony and disagreements and fighting and so forth will also much lesser. So this is a way in which we can
to recognize the fact we must understand the interdependence between us, everyone. It means that everyone are depending on each other, then we should recognize this, and then it will help us have a better life.
Naso sama
chila chite
chila tene drupa te hako e tone, and naso sama misate ya pochagire tendere. Yes, this is exactly by understanding.
Ti samlo du yobayina ani kisoko nyoda mombochi ani chorindo resera pena chila chite nga samlo du yobayina pena jakab den panjala chila chite nga samlo yana ti pare mantri ta sani ni ngumare resera ani droboji ni na chila pa tenga ndishi du yobayina koni ti non chemta jamri jada tindi yongumara odi kichimbo resera.
So yeah, this is exactly how it is. If we'll understand that we are depending on each other, so it will have much less problems. And if we are talking about society, if we'll understand that as a society, we need to live and exist dependent on each other, so we'll have much less problems in the society. And also we can talk about it in terms of countries. If we'll understand that if countries will understand that they are dependent on each other, that they need to be established dependent on each other, so there won't be any basis for starting wars against each other. And also among friends, if friends will understand that they are dependent on each other, so they won't have any kind of fights among each other and arguments, these kind of things.
So the teacher says that the way that we see each other depends much about our own perception. An object could be something a little bit different than what we perceive. We perceive it according to our first impression, our knowledge, our facts that we know. This is the way we see others. But in fact, others may be different than what we perceive because their nature is different than what we perceive in basic. Meaning any object is typically might be different than what I see. That's different selves, if I understood correctly.
Personalna ko karelen ta inserna, nasola sharvanashin, nasola nawanashin, ta mune yulter, tetan midrava, yosigrava, terna moshepa mila javaina, animi chigi, ta soso nyamyo, ta soso namane yo sanotanda tesola tene. Anishente in shasha chene, inante muone sola tende impe chiara yorva. Anitende ko tende siglantai. Nipsesa ta yula ta perna narangilo la sharvatante yugi ranshin. Teni mindrava yosibires. Anina ko karen ta inserna perna yul korana con dag jami drivers dag. Todo beka.
다 팀들이 돈데 페나 일라보 자와이나라 콩레지나 작바노 콘레나 레모노레 코 작바레세데 네베나 몰토니 코 작바자마도 틴문 타지도 코 작바자 토마레 딜리 자지나 코 캄보자도라 틴나지 코 아니 레모노 톨도 나 아니 몰다베나 코 아니 튼두로와레 림통제 자바도 간디지나 코니 틴니 코 레모도 튼두 간카르샤바네 chigla teni khoti ni rembo tundu ja ma to ta chi de ko ani rembo ja to mu zara ko jaba resna ta chi de ko ani jaba chang man ta chi de ko le rinji do na ko tundu chan ro ra odi ne ma sin chi res.
So in order to explain interdependence in an easy way or in a way which is more understandable, we can say that for example this guy is quite tall, right? But it is not that this guy is tall like one form. I don't really know how to translate this kind of word. This is a very specific word, but one-sided. It's kind of, it has like the connotation of one-sided only, like 100% all, like from all of the aspects.
It's not subject. It's not objective.
Mm.
The way that we start because I'm shocked.
Mm. Yeah, this is actually exactly the example that Gela gave, that actually we can say that the guy is dull because the other persons in the room, like relatively to him, are short. But this is not that from his side he's long or short or something like this, because if there will be like taller guy than him, so we won't posit him necessarily as long or and so forth, as tall, yeah. So therefore, like this is a way that we can understand interdependence in an easy manner.
Yes. Question?
Do you have any question?
There's something I didn't understand quite well. It was when you said that the glass doesn't exist in the way that this appears.
That the glass doesn't exist in the way that it appears.
Mm-hmm. I didn't understand in what way you what kind of.
Gena gitare son sernan naranzo lola glass de charlatan anche. Charlatartu lucare se gena gison sons. Ani carecel naso lola charlatartu no lucare. Caiolte.
네.
charlatartu no.
저 나지 연행 라발 페난디 depth 찾아봐이나라. 안에 depth인데라 안에 depth 파겔 depth인도 삼삼지열 하래. 디는 라반노 depth 요레 삼삼지열아. 하래. depth 요레스는 바 depth 칸도 진도나 디 갭샤테레 디레베 쇼레레지나 안에 depth 문도 하더라. 안디 그 차시 두서레 같은 가서 로근디 depth 파타마도 예그 띵 안에 depth 진도고는 가서 니에 그 띵문도 하더라. 대원디신.
Yes, so we can also give an example with this notebook. So if I hold this notebook, in your mind it will appear that I'm holding a notebook, right? But if I ask you where is the notebook, like whether it's this side of the notebook, whether it's this side, whether it's each page of the notebook, so eventually we won't be able to posit anything as the notebook. After searching for the notebook, we won't be able to posit anything and say this is the notebook. And not being able to posit anything to the notebook, so this is how things are not established, things are not existent in the way that it appears to us. This is that things are not established from the side of the object.
How do they exist?
I think that he had a question. There's a second.
I just had a comment. Please go.
No, I just wondering.
So yeah,
Things are not exist the way we perceive them, because you cannot define a notebook by its pages or by its cover or by its front side or other side, and say I define it by the concept of a notebook. This is a concept of a notebook that I'm holding. You're not holding a notebook, you're holding the concept of a notebook. But it's the same. So if things cannot be defined by their aspects, different aspects, how can we define things? What is the meaning of things? Are there things in the world at all? Because anything that I try to define, you cannot define it. If I try to define this camera, it has million pieces. What is the camera? It's a concept. So what exists in the world for real, and is there anything in the world then? If you cannot define anything, does it mean that anything is not existing? Simple question.
That's a concurrent answer now. That Chetan, Kirangi, Tenderson, that temare, shoulder, nemare, Tenderson, Vemba, and Chetan, that Teb Gitanda, that Tito Gitana, and a Tito Gitseni, Tendeshak to Gimarve, Kanisana Tela Keshu Rene, Tenimarva, and Gavita Tito Gikeshu Rene, the Tito de Shagmatukaina, and Tito Gitseni, and Tito Gitanda, Shagayon,
대자고래서라. Titibzin nga so ni ige trago temchila shu indiri yamochila nga so log pa ni titibzi taja gore sara dini shuli re pa tsangde sara tinga ige triya yosa dini jila toba go pa ni titibzi ni taja azur ma to ige tinga nga so pagila titim du samsamji ige tini yoban riji sha gore sara ige tini titibzi pa ige tini du samsamji gore de ina te zinro ni niya meba insani te meba re la gore sara jida titib meba re zina titib meba ma titib ziyada kanji and lopa usually dirig choban dirig ya zo jan yotara japshat sama yosa titepsi ike tisa yosa titepsi ni chechu tindi changsa jala ani toba ga titepsi ta ja na jid te ta na titepsi de oresra aso na jing titepte mundu asira na jin titepsi phagin du sasam ke jingdo asra te mundu log phat tak ra phagin di usually re choksa ta titepsi ta ja ma to phagi yeteni ani titepsi mundu asra Mezada Teresta.
So, actually, if we're talking about this book, it appears to be existent from its own side. This kind of a book, this kind of a notebook. This is how it appears, but actually, if you try to understand, if you try to search for it, like whether it's kind of the book, how it appears to us, whether it actually existent in the same manner that it appears to us, so we're left out with nothing, because things are not actually existent the way that it appears, that existent from their own side and so forth. But it is not like we cannot posit a book or notebook as something that fulfills certain characteristics. We can say that notebook, this is something that fulfills certain characteristics of having a few pages, whatever, like kind of definition we'll try to posit for it. It is not like we cannot say that the object which completes these characteristics is not a notebook. It is not like that. But it is that if you try to look with all of the characteristics of the notebook and say, is this the notebook, is this page is the notebook, is this page in the notebook, and so forth. So we won't be able to posit the notebook and say, this is the notebook. And actually, we can say that the notebook is existent based on an imputation based on all of the parts of the notebook. And otherwise, this is not something which is existent from the side of the notebook, from its own side.
이게 저기 저 제사지라 대비라 이게 저 제통이 저 제사지라 대비 다자로 다바나지 다나 대비되어 말 나나신 거 봐주고 이때니 요소선데 되어 말 뜻진로는 아니 니에가 있으니 대랑문님에 받다음에 봐서도 되는 시리즈. That's the last question.
So we can say that the book, it is that which fulfills the function of some kind of platform of writing. We can say that this is the meaning of the book. But if this is the meaning of the notebook, sorry. But if you try to look for the notebook, if you search for the notebook, you won't be able to find it. And this is the meaning of the lack of inherent existence or the selflessness.
참을 자유리서라 다안드는 페나 네 간산지나 네 미잖아 연로함에 마시던 거 되니 pom보든지가 땡케질 마지 따자로 아래 아주 미지네 가제시야 돈다고 봐 삼단계여 봐라 아니 당아지 야랑니 동에서 지어라 인디게 띵데 초사지라 아니 미지 따자봐라 마동아서 나서 미게 pom보 땡이 바기 윤두 삼삼지 아니 진로는 이해해 봤다도
And this kind of way of thinking we can apply for all of the phenomena in the world. So for all of the phenomena. So we can also apply it for a person. So let's say that person or an individual, it is someone, so in a human being, it is someone who is has the abilities of communicating and to reflect. And there are like different kind of ways of positing a definition for a person, but let's say that this is our definition. So a person which completes, like an individual which completes this kind of characteristics, we can say that this is a human being. There is no problem with that. But it is not like this human being is established from the side of the aggregates of itself, and therefore it is not inherently existent. And this is how we can apply this kind of reasoning and way of thinking to all of the phenomena in the world.
So my question is, in Buddhism we say that there's no permanent independent self, right?
Mm.
So my question is, what is it that goes from life to life to life?
Mm.
How can we define that?
Mm-hmm. If there is no permanent self, how can self can go from life to life?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
가rsonsong
Kasa nang shugi mune shena takpa ta raman shengi dak ende yomares. Ani chesan kasi takpe dak ende me paina ta sen ramane. Sechimala ta joningi dak kandes shalpu gires.
말에 데르데 다데 소다 남실라 답에 안에 다지어라 딘도스 다 남시드 도라 가서 봉봉 가서 지지 봉보도 기아치만 도와 시제고 말아 난 남시드 기아만 남시드 안데는데 치만 도와 시제고라 텔라 답이 다지어라 남실라 답이 다지어라 대안념도 도 텔라 팀비 강사지어라 어디 있는도 되고레스 자니
Mm-hmm. So we can say that there is the self which is imputed, which is designated on the mental consciousness, which is going from the past life to the future life. So this kind of self, which is designated on this mental consciousness, which is going from past life to future life and so forth, this kind of self we can posit as the self which is not permanent and still goes from former life to the next life. So regarding our physical body, it is quite easy to understand that this is not something that goes from previous life to next life, right? Because after we die, so this body is just getting rotten, and it's not that anything is going to happen with this body. But with regards to our mental consciousness, this is what goes from previous life to next life, right? And the self, which is designated on this mental consciousness, which is going from previous life to next life, we can also assert this kind of self that goes from previous life to next life, and not an impermanent self, as the Buddhism asserts.
So the spiritual part of us, self will be spiritual that goes life and another one.
I would just say, it's like, what does it mean spiritual? Because there is no specific word for it in Tibetan, I think.
Instead of time, there is a physical body,
Mm-hmm.
there's a mental body. What about the mental part of us? Yes, this is the word. But something is, for your belief, something is going on between one and another one, and another. So this is the spiritual part?
The spiritual, you mean like the mental consciousness, right?
Yeah.
The mental consciousness.
Yeah.
So I just try to clarify the question. So you're saying like whether the self that goes from previous life to next life, is it the mental consciousness?
Yeah.
This is what you're trying to ask, right?
This is my
Okay. So that's just kiyo amina chi droning gindakte. Te igi namshira kogarates.
이게 남실라 때니 타바참 거스. 라. 아주 폼보다 때니 타베다. 이게 다 넘버가 남시다 폼보가 야오라. 아니 가서 주지 폼보 쳐이 폼 다간지 남시 폼보 주지 폼보니까 다그파 타니 타사가 다지 작을마다 다시 하고 말해서라. 다시 하고 말해서. 텔레 타비 다지 오래테 아니 남신도티 텔레 타비 다던로 되고 그래서라. 어디 전이 단로라도 되리스.
So the self that goes from previous life to next life is the self which is merely designated based on the mental consciousness. So we can say, according to Buddhism, there is the presentation of the 5 aggregates. So we have the physical aggregate, the aggregate of form, means like the physical aggregate, physical body, aggregate of form, aggregate of feeling, aggregate of perception, aggregate of compositional factors, and aggregate of primary consciousness or mental consciousness. So primary consciousness, yes. So these 5 aggregates, we can call them also the basis of the designation. The basis upon which the self is designated or imputed. So this is the basis. And then, at the moment of death, when the mental consciousness proceeds to the next life, continues to the next life, the self, which is designated on this mental consciousness, is also continuing to the next life. And this is the way that the self is continuing to the next life. Yeah, so I think that we run out of time, so therefore we'll have to finish now the class. Okay, yes, so I want to say thank you.
Thank you.
For your patience.
So, Gonche, tu vas la 46.